I was reading a news article the other day on the increase in average age in divorcing couples in Australia, and I thought it'd be fitting to bring back an episode with the best family and divorce lawyer I know. Kate O'Grady shares so much in our chat, in particular the 5 key tips if you're going through a separation or divorce. We talk in depth on the court process, advice for blended families, custody of pets in legal situations, financial agreements and wills, and much more. This is a powerful episode, and if you feel like someone you know needs to hear it, please share it with them. Let's get into it.
If you talk badly about the other parent in front of your child, you're talking badly about one half of of your child. Yeah. And they identify with that other person. And kids have the most beautiful capacity to love regardless of what the other person's like. You can have the most horrible parent and kids will just love them. Yeah. Anyway, they're so forgiving. But if you have a parent that can't shelter them from their pain and talk badly about the other person, you're going to hurt your kids. You have to find a way and different channels to talk about it, and it's not with your kids.
Yeah, absolutely. So Kate, thank you so much for coming in today. I was just thinking about how long I've known you, and I think it's about 7 years. Is that right?
Yeah, it would be, because Sonny is 6. He was 6 in October, so I think I was pregnant. So going through that journey, my first and only baby, and then getting to know you quite well after that in the context of, a marriage breakdown and separation, and needing to have quite a lot of support from you in that context. So I definitely think of you and talk about you as being someone that's been integral in my, motherhood journey and my healing journey, and someone that's definitely inspired and helped me to be where I'm at today. So.
Oh, well, that's very kind. Well, it works both ways, because
number one fan over here.
I feel like I do send quite a few of my patients who then become your clients, and you send quite a few of your clients who then become my patients. So I think we've got a really nice working relationship as well, and I hold you in the highest of esteem, which is why I wanted you to come in today. And one of the reasons I do refer my patients to you is because I think that you are this amazingly intelligent but down to earth, such a great communicator. And I also know that you have a real sense of fairness. And I think a lot of women who are embarking on separation are really, really concerned that, they are going to work with someone who's going to be very fair in the process. So look, thank you for that. I'd love to step back a little bit, and I'd love you to tell me how you've got to where you are today, because clearly you've got an amazing career and are extremely well thought of. But how have you ended up where you are?
Okay. Well, going way back, I grew up in the Blue Mountains, which is west of Sydney, for anyone not knowing where that is. And, kind of small little town. I had hippie parents. They, packed us up when I was 4 and took off up the East Coast, and I lived in a tent for 9 months of my life before I started kindy. And, so there's some unconventional parts of my upbringing, but amazing. So they love music and the environment, and both have a real sense of justice and social justice. So both of them are very passionate about animals and the environment and helping the underdog. So my dad's been known to get into punch-ups, at the pub way back when he did used to drink. He doesn't anymore, but, getting into fights with someone that might have said something racist or said something, and he goes for the maroons purely because everybody else goes for the blues, that kind of mindset of we try to help out other people that can't, or
love him.
He's also a bit of a shit stirrer too, so I get that from him. So went to school in the Blue Mountains, high school in the Blue Mountains, and I came into law by complete accident. So when I was doing year 12, I had 12 different things that I had applied for. So it was like zoology and social science. I think I wanted to be a drama teacher because I loved my drama teacher so much. She was great. And she was so progressive. I went to a Catholic high school and we were doing Rocky Horror Picture Show in year 10. She was wild. So she was very inspirational to me at that time. She was great. So wanted to be a drama teacher. And so I really didn't know what I wanted to do. Probably should have had a year off and, travelled and things. But I remember my careers advisor talking to me about the early acceptance scheme as being a way to apply for uni before we do the HSC. I had my heart set on going to Sydney Uni. I was like, I want to go to Sydney. I want to, get out of the mountains and go to Sydney. But the early acceptance scheme was run through UWS, which is now Western Sydney University. So he convinced me to apply. Part of that was having to get all of your teachers to write references and you submit examples of all of your work. And anyway, one of the choices was journalism. I was thinking maybe I could do communications. And he said, why don't you apply for law as well? I said, I don't want to be a lawyer. He said, well, just try for the highest mark and see how you go. And then I ended up being accepted to that before I even sat my exams. So I think it was such a huge relief just knowing that as a backup plan, if I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do, that I had been accepted to do law, like of all the things before I even
Big question, did you actually study for your HSC once you knew you had that result?
Not really. Not really.
I know lots of people who do that.
My exam results were slightly lower than my prior marks, but I was also really relaxed going into the exams, which I think helped. Like there's too much pressure, I think, on kids going into the HSC, and lots of friends that didn't do great in the HSC that are now way more successful than me. So there's too much pressure put on.
Agree. Sorry, I digress.
Don't we all? I'll get completely off track if you don't keep me on track. So yeah, I ended up deciding to do it. So I accepted so it was a combined communications and law degree at Western Sydney. So that was spread over all different campuses. So Campbelltown and Kingswood and Parramatta. And I did, journalism and then the law degree, which I hated initially because it just didn't make any sense. We hadn't even done legal studies at high school, so I had no idea what they were talking about, the legal terminology. And I remember my very first criminal class. I had this great lecturer. She was fabulous, but she asked everyone to explain why they were here and what their inspiration was for law. And I was like, I love Ally McBeal. And I just saw her face drop. I was like, oh no, I've become that, ditzy blonde in the class that's referencing a pop show. I thought I should have said something really smart, but I actually really love Ally McBeal. So it's fitting. But I came to like law much more in the later part of the degree when I actually got to pick electives that I liked. So I got to do human rights, environmental law, children's law, media law, family law, and I had a really fantastic family law lecturer who I'm still in contact with. And I think just her passion for her job was quite inspirational, and the human aspect of that topic. But even that wasn't enough to make me want to do that after I finished. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I still worked as a waitress when I finished uni, and I thought maybe I'll study, maybe I'll travel, go overseas. And then I just randomly walked into a community legal centre in Katoomba one day and just asked whether they needed any volunteers, which they were very happy to snap me up. So I started working as a volunteer just a couple of days a week at the community legal centre in Katoomba and met one of my all-time, greatest mentors and friends, Sarah, who was a very senior lawyer at the legal centre, and she was my mentor, and she'd been a family lawyer in the UK, passionate, feminist, advocate for women, and, over the course of knowing her, I've seen stacks of photos of her at protest, rallies and marches and, talk about fighting for women's rights and for the underdog. She dedicated her whole career to helping women, particularly women that have experienced family violence. And she after the community legal centre, she went on to work at Law Access and, continued her whole career dedicated to helping women. So that was my first proper
what a mentor.
So she was very passionate about what she did, and she just taught me what she knew, which was family law. So I kind of fell into that by accident. It wasn't intentional. I thought maybe I would do criminal law or journalism, but I think meeting her directed the path towards family law.
Okay. So how long have you been working as a family lawyer?
Makes me feel really old when I do this. I was admitted in 2006, so 17 years, going on 18 years.
How can that be when you're only 27?
Right, exactly. I actually, the university, I was invited to do a speech at an award ceremony that they had last year. And as I was writing the speech and realizing that I hadn't been at campus for 19 years, I was thinking, how can this be? I'm still only 20.
I just finished.
I always have this thought of myself as being really young.
Okay, I'm glad it's not just me.
No, I'm kind of stuck at, 26, 27, but no, I've definitely been practicing for, yes, almost 18 years.
Okay, and still loving it every day?
No, absolutely, absolutely not. I think I find it challenging. I find it rewarding. Some days it's awful. Like some days it's really hard, really sad. We deal with people going through crisis and they're in trauma and they're grieving and they're angry. And on the flip side of that, people can be angry and spiteful and petty. And some days it's absolutely exhausting. And I think shout out to all of the family lawyers at this time of year and, doctors and psychologists and counsellors. It's really hard. Christmas is really hard for people. And I know certainly in our office, everyone's really tired. Yeah. Today's our last day of the year and we're all trying to, get into the festive Christmas spirit. But it's hard at this time of year because it's a sad time for a lot of people. Emotions are really high. People have been through a lot. This year, it feels like it's been hard. For a lot of people, it feels like a big year. So I feel quite tired, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. I do think, funny, this is the tiredest year I've felt, and I feel like a lot of people seem to be the same. And I know that COVID seems to be a distant memory, but I don't know, the hangover effects from that just seem to reverberate on and on and on, don't they? And, you know, the financial situation and things, people are struggling.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in the world. I think it's quite heavy. People are under a lot of pressure. And I, quite passionately, as you know, try to help people when they're in that crisis. And despite my best attempts, to remain, detached, sometimes you can't because I do care a lot about the people that I'm helping. So you do take that on, whether you try really hard not to. So it can be really hard. Some days I absolutely love it. And I have some really amazing clients at the moment, just absolutely beautiful humans that make it so rewarding and make my job so much easier. So some days I love it, but definitely not every day.
One thing that I hear repeatedly from all my new patients is that often their past experiences with appointments to address their symptoms of menopause have made them feel rushed, unheard and frustrated. As a doctor of 25 years with first-hand experience and understanding the many symptoms that one woman may encounter in her menopause transition, I knew I couldn't do this subject justice in a 15-minute appointment, which is why I've created the menopause appointments, designed to support you on your journey through the perimenopause and postmenopause. This 60-minute session gives you and your doctor the ideal amount of time to understand your concerns, needs and desires. It gives us time to do a comprehensive assessment, including a full review of your medical history, assessing your mood, your sleep, weight and libido, and much more. Receive referrals for tests as needed, prescribe suitable medications if required, perform a skin analysis and leave you with a comprehensive tailored plan unique to you. This is crafted to help smooth your transition through the perimenopause, postmenopause and allow you to thrive, not just survive. If you or someone you know is experiencing perimenopause or continuing to have symptoms in the postmenopause, these appointments are for you. You can book an appointment with one of our doctors today. We have clinics located at Forster Speech and Newcastle, and you can book online at youbydrshaunaWatts.com.au. And do you find that you mostly look after women, or is it a mix of both?
No, a complete mixed bag. So I think given my background working with, victim services and women that have and children that have experienced family violence, there is a perception, I think, with part of my biography that I'm a women's lawyer and that I only represent women, which is absolutely not true. I love men and I help, a lot of men to get access to their kids or a fair property settlement. And I mean, whilst I'm passionate, and I do think of myself as being a feminist and I love helping women, I just want to help people achieve something that's fair, and that extends to all humans, regardless of gender and regardless of, their circumstances. But I just want to help people get a fair outcome and something that's best for the children.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. So look, one of the reasons why I wanted you to come in is because I would love to, I think, I often see little on Facebook groups or just friends or family or patients, people are always going, I don't know what to do. I don't know where I stand. I don't know how to make this go okay. And, they're embarking on a separation. And so I thought it would be really nice if we could kind of pick your brain a little bit. I mean, I know it's not specific advice to anyone individually, but I'd love to know, what are the do's and don'ts from your perspective? How can we remain sane in a separation?
Yeah, and it's such a good question, and it's one that I really like trying to help people before, if possible, because it's really important for people to have an understanding of what the process looks like, what could happen, the risks that they're facing, how to protect and look after themselves. So what I really like is if people come to me when they're thinking about it to get some advice so that they know what their entitlements are, and I can talk them through the process and what to expect, because often if the separation has already happened, the emotions are so high, people can't think clearly, and then it's kind of people get blindsided by the process and get quite confused and then caught up in it, and it can be really difficult. So I think and I have to say, sometimes you don't see it coming. Sometimes it's a surprise and a shock separation. So obviously this is not going to apply to everybody. But for those people that might be thinking, things are a bit rocky, I'm not feeling safe in this situation in terms of security in the relationship, maybe I might get some advice about what that might look like. So tip 1 would be to get some advice early. And it's completely confidential. No one needs to know that you're getting that advice. Tip number 2, please make sure that you see a family lawyer and someone that actually knows what they're talking about. Just to give you a bit of an example, I met with a client yesterday, beautiful man that had spent $35,000 with a lawyer in Sydney, who turned out to be a criminal and traffic lawyer who had absolutely no idea what he was doing, happily took this man's money for absolutely nothing. The court documents were drafted so badly they got rejected by the court. The advice that he was given was completely wrong. And this poor man has spent all of his savings with a lawyer that has absolutely no idea what he's talking about. So he now has to try to get that money back whilst at the same time try to pursue, access to his children with me and then, spend more money. So that could have been avoided by going to see someone that knows what they're doing in the first place. So get advice early, get advice from somebody that knows what they're talking about.
So a specialist.
Absolutely. Have a team. And that's, I think, it's really fitting that you and I are having this conversation because you were so integral to me as part of my team. Going through my own separation, I literally could not have done it without you. Like I could not have got through that without you. And I think in those dark days, especially when you're a new mom and, Sunny didn't sleep, I was an absolute basket case. And just knowing that I could trust you, that I could come to you for help and that you directed me to people that could actually help me, legal stuff aside, you need to have people in your corner. So what I will say to my clients when they come in is, this is a holistic approach to get you through this. It's not just about the legal stuff. You have to be supported, ideally with friends and family if you have that luxury. A lot of people don't. Yeah. If you don't have that luxury of having beautiful friends and family around you, build your own team and find a great GP. I know I can't refer to you anymore because their books are closed, but find a great GP that can refer you to a psychologist. Find a great psychologist, somebody that you can talk to about the emotional side of things that you're going through. Find a great accountant and financial planner, especially for women or people in a relationship that don't know how the finances have been running. They don't know how it's been operating and how the bills are being paying or how the accounts are structured or how the companies might be set up, whether they're a director, whether they're a shareholder, what the consequences of that might look like. A lot of people come in and say, I have no idea, I just signed forms. I don't know what they were, I just signed what was put in front of me. So we often have to try to untangle and find out what's been happening over a long period of time. And I guess for me, it's about building a team to help empower people going through that process so that they have all of the information and resources available. So you want to kind of build a team so that they're coming into it with a whole range of people behind them. So you want to cater for the emotional side. So you want to make sure that they have somebody to talk to. I can talk to clients about the emotional side of things, but that's actually not my role.
Yes.
And I'm not best placed to do that. I'm not a qualified counsellor or a psychologist. I can help with the legal side of things, but they really need to have somebody on board that can help with those kind of questions and debriefing, and having somebody to share those things with, having an accountant that can give them their own advice separate to the, couple or family accountant that might be acting, a financial planner to help them plan, moving forward, to help them analyze documents, which can be quite confusing, in addition to the legal advice that they would be getting. So it's about building that team. And, as we move through the legal process, we would then be looking at, bringing in a mediator, or potentially I'm doing a lot of work at the moment with a child consultant who's, she's also a mediator, but she will meet with the children in the mediation process. And then she comes back to us and feeds back the children's views and their experiences.
So is she a lawyer?
No, and which I think is great, because lawyers are great. I love lawyers, but sometimes we can get in the way.
Yeah.
We're literally trained to argue and, analyze and pull things apart, and, whereas sometimes having a different perspective of a person that's coming at it with their sole view and purpose is to make sure that the children's views are represented and championed in that process. So I just, the older that I get, the more that I think we just need to try to deal with it holistically, rather than just fighting every little point. So, sorry, going back to the question, do get off track, but having a team of experts around you so that you have all of the different people in your corner to help you understand the information, having proper legal advice, having that support. I think making sure that you have an understanding of your financial circumstances is really important, and a lot of people don't. They don't even know what bank accounts there is, or what bills are being paid and from where, or what entities or like companies or trusts there might be, what property is worth. So I'll do a lot of that work at the outset to help people get an understanding of what it is that we're actually dealing with here. And then I think the most important thing is the mindset going into it, of knowing that in any separation, there's going to be compromise and you're never going to get exactly what you want. Because even if you go to court, and even if you get a judge that agrees with absolutely everything that you say, you're going to pay a hell of a lot of money to get there. And the outcome, I don't think, is ever going to be exactly what you want. And sometimes even if people do achieve that, they still don't walk away happy.
Yeah.
Because the process that they've had to go through to get there is quite traumatic in and of itself. So I think the quicker that you can get in and the quicker that you can get out, even if that means taking something that might not necessarily be what you want and compromising and getting out quickly, rather than being bogged down in ongoing legal battles and court. Court is a place that people should avoid if they can. And I have to constantly say, some people can't avoid it and some people need to be engaged in litigation. And approaching a separation, like I've just talked about, is also a luxury that some people don't have. If there's family violence, significant mental health issues, if you're dealing with somebody on the other side that's really difficult, and, a true narcissist, nearly every client I get coming in will tell me that the other side's a narcissist these days. I think it's a
kind of slightly overused phrase at this point.
It's very overused. I mean, but, in my job, I deal with true narcissists, and you cannot negotiate with a narcissist. You cannot co-parent with a narcissist. So what I'm talking about is, people that can communicate, that can try to work together, putting aside some of those differences to try to get an outcome. And what that means is being open about your financial disclosure. Don't try to hide things. If people come into it with a view to try and deceive or hide things from the other person, it's just going to take longer. We'll find it out. It takes longer. It costs everyone more money, and then it builds mistrust. So if you go through the process and you're not trusting anything that the other person says, it's really hard to get a negotiated settlement. So coming into a matter, we will try really hard to make sure that everything's on the table, that they get realistic advice, that they know the risks, that they come into it with an open mind, willing to compromise, and an understanding that you can only get a settlement two ways. One is by consent. So you have to work together and reach an agreement, or you go to court and a judge makes a decision, and a judge might make a terrible decision that doesn't work for your family. So you are best placed to make a decision that works for you and that works for your family and that works for your children. And that can only be done by consent, which means you both have to try to reach an agreement.
Do you ever feel like sometimes, there's always lots of emotion involved, and sometimes people want a settlement that kind of represents their pain, or like a payment for their pain or suffering, or, if there's been another party involved. And I often have to say to people, like, to be honest, that's not going to really become relevant in your financial settlement. Is that right? So
100%. Like, you have just summed it up. So, I mean, the legal side of things is easy, but what's really difficult is the emotional side. And we're often dealing with people coming in where there's been a traumatic relationship breakdown. One person is often completely blindsided, whereas there's usually one party that's kind of seen it coming a little bit in advance. Unfortunately, some relationships do break down because of infidelity, and that can be really painful and really hard. It can also break down because of violence or mental health issues or drug and alcohol issues or gambling. And a lot of that can be really hard and traumatic. So people are grappling to deal with these really big emotional issues, and people are hurt. And sometimes they want, justice, or they want the other person to pay, or there's this sense that the court's going to, as you say, compensate for that pain. And that's not how it works. The court does not compensate for pain. Infidelity is irrelevant in a family law matter. It might be relevant in a parenting context if we're trying to work out, how to navigate with the children, and the emotional and conflict between the parents. But in a financial settlement, it's completely irrelevant. And that can be really hard for people because sometimes they're like, I want that person to pay because they've hurt me. And so trying to help people work through to let go of some of that and understand that the court is never going to say, you're completely right, this person's an asshole, you get everything because of what happened. It just doesn't work like that. So that's why I think addressing the emotional side of the relationship breakdown is vital to work through the process while you're doing the legal side of things, to make sure you have that support, because the legal side is not going to fix that stuff.
Yeah. The other thing that I would say is the commonest question I get asked as a GP is, if I have a mental health plan, which is in Australia something you use to access psychology, and they're always really worried that that's going to be held against them, or that they might lose custody of their children if they have a mental health plan that says they've got anxiety or depression, or perhaps they're, drinking too much alcohol. And, I do always reassure them that, I actually feel like having a psychologist to navigate the whole process is probably essential. But do you ever get clients who are just too scared, they feel like it's going to be used against them?
Absolutely, all the time. And I mean, the reality is, and I do have to say to people, if you're in court, there is the ability for subpoenas to be issued for your medical records and psychological records. So that can be really confronting for people, and it's not a nice thought. No one wants, those records to be made available. But the more important point is that in a family law context, where there are concerns, whether it's mental health concerns around drug or alcohol, the main concern is if somebody doesn't have insight and is not taking any steps to address the behaviour. Most people I know have anxiety or depression or both if they're going through a relationship breakdown. And I mean, I came to you, I got a mental health plan for anxiety going through a relationship breakdown. So I share that just, to reassure people about how normal that is going through something so traumatic. It's absolutely normal to have those feelings and integral that you get help. So what we look at as a lawyer is, okay, well, is there an issue with mental health? What are they doing about it? If there's evidence to show that they've identified that there's an issue, great, that person has insight. They're able to see when they might need help. Have they sought assistance? Fantastic. What that does is say, if that person is experiencing difficulties moving forward, they're likely to actually seek out help and have that issue addressed. That's actually a really positive thing. Are they getting treatment or are they on medication? That's actually a positive thing. What's more concerning is if someone, for example, had a mental health issue that's not being treated, they're not taking medication for fear of having that, that's likely to be viewed in a much more negative way in the family law and court context than someone actively seeking help. So I take it as a positive. I think it's fantastic if someone's engaging in that way, and I think there's definitely a shift to the court viewing it in that same way.
Yeah, okay. And a lot of people often struggle with the family court system in Australia. They say it takes too long. You know, some people think it sides with the mothers, some people think it sides with the fathers, some people feel like it's completely, old fashioned and it hasn't kept up with the changes in sort of society. I mean, obviously you're working within a system and there's not much that you can do without it, but do you think it kind of gets bad press, or do you think it is what it is pretty tricky to work within?
Oh, look, I think it would be a really hard job to be in charge of trying to, create the system and to try to fix it. There's been a huge overhaul over the past couple of years to try and address some of the problems, and absolutely it has been a place where people get stuck and they spend so much money, and to a certain extent that is still the case. They're trying really hard. The court's got a lot of funding to try and address some of the issues, and we're starting to see some movement. So cases are moving forward much faster. They've established specific lists. For example, they've got an Indigenous list. They've got, the Everett list and the Lighthouse list, which are for cases where family violence has been flagged quite early on. They've got lists for children's matters where there's serious sexual abuse allegations and family violence allegations. So they get fast-tracked through the system. But the reality is it costs a huge amount of money that most people would not be able to afford. And once we're in the system, you're stuck, and you have to go to the court days. You have to file the documents that we're directed to file. You have to attend the scheduled mediation or court events, and it can be really expensive. You're stuck with their rules and processes. So there's not a lot of flexibility once you're in that system.
So once you're in, you can't go, oh, actually, we're going to now negotiate. It's like you're in the court system and you can't get back out of it.
You can get out if you agree,
right?
If you reach an agreement and enter into consent orders. But if one person doesn't agree,
right,
you're in,
yeah,
and you can't get out. And it means that if they list a court event, you have to go. And they're going back to in-person court appearances now for a lot of matters. And the court has amazing benefits, and there's a lot of incredible judges and registrars that work in the court system and who work tirelessly to try and help families move through faster. But the reality is, because of how many families are in the court system, it takes a really long time. So anyone coming in to court could expect to be there for at least 12 months, potentially more. And the cost, it could range from, $10,000 for a small hearing to, I've got clients that have spent, $500,000 in legal fees. That's over a really, really long period of time and big asset pool. And I know of cases when I worked at firms in Sydney where the legal fees were $2 million for their legal fees. And it's astounding.
End, really.
That's not normal, I should say. That's not normal, but it's very expensive. So I definitely try to keep matters out of court if I can.
And so if you're separating and you have children, tell me what you think. What would your advice be to people who have children? Would it be, look, allow access, don't try and punish the partner by not allowing access to children? Or some people feel like, oh, if I let the other person have the children from the outset, that I'm giving up, sort of my bargaining chip and all sorts of things. And what would your advice be around that?
Yeah, it's really simple. It's think about it from their perspective and think about what's best for them. And that's what the court's job is to do, and what our job is supposed to be, is what are the arrangements that are best for the children. And we look at things like the nature of their relationships with each of the parent. Is it safe for them to have a relationship with the other parent? It's not always safe. If there's issues of violence or mental health issues or drug and alcohol issues, or cases where there's really high conflict, cases where there's psychological harm, where one person is just hell-bent on alienating the children from the other parent and talking so badly about the other person, it can lead to such severe psychological harm that can be a real risk. So, but if those issues don't exist, and there is no risk to the children spending time with the other parent, then they should have a relationship and communication with both of their parents and their extended families. And I think too often we do see people saying, oh, but then, you know, child support, or then I won't get as much out of the property settlement, or they are often used as bargaining tools. And that's what really gets me in a family law context, is the kids should not be used in that way as a bargaining tool. It always should be about what's best for them. And that means that if there are risk issues, then they shouldn't see the other parent. And I've had to have that conversation this week and say to someone, I know that you don't want to rock the boat, but I think your children are at risk, and I think you need to think really carefully about whether they can go back to the other person, because you could be criticised if you allow children to spend time with somebody that is a risk of harm.
Okay.
But generally, it's really important for kids to know both sides of their family.
Yeah.
It's really important for their sense of identity. And what I would say to parents is, if you talk badly about the other parent in front of your child, you're talking badly about one half of of your child. Yeah. And they identify with that other person. And kids have the most beautiful capacity to love regardless of what the other person's like. You can have the most horrible parent and kids will just love them. Yeah. Anyway, they're so forgiving. They're just, you know, most beautiful little creatures. But if you have a parent that can't shelter them from their pain and talk badly about the other person, you're going to hurt your kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have to find a way and different channels to talk about it, and it's not with your kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And is the default in Australia 50-50, where you spend 50% of the time with one parent and 50% with the other? Like, that was, I have to say, when I first moved from Northern Ireland, I had never even seen that before. That, I mean, things might have changed in 10 years because I moved away, but that was not the normal in Northern Ireland. They would have tended to live with one parent and saw the other parent every other weekend. But I definitely, since I've been in Australia, I've seen this more, where kids will spend 1 week with one parent and then 1 week with another, or half the week with one parent, half the week with the other. Is that kind of the norm, and then you work backwards from that based on people's jobs and desires, etc., or is that not normal?
I wouldn't say it's a norm. It's definitely more common in some scenarios. I think when I first started practicing, the norm was very much, as you say, live with one parent every second weekend and half the holidays. That was kind of the standard arrangement that we would just do all the time. And then we had the amendments to the Family Law Act in 2006 and the introduction of what is called the presumption of equal shared parental responsibility, which actually refers to decision making. But a lot of people misunderstood that and think that it creates a presumption of equal time. What the Act does say, it's about to be amended. The changes are coming in. They'll come into effect early next year, or around May. That if an order is made for the joint decision making, the court must consider equal time. So there's been a huge amount of confusion about that. And I think with mediators and counsellors and other professionals and some lawyers about what the law actually says. Okay. It doesn't say that you should have equal time. It just says if an order is made for the parents to have joint decision making, then you should consider whether equal time is appropriate. That's what it said. But we certainly did see an influx of cases where equal time orders were made, which I think was based on a misunderstanding of what the law is actually saying. And where I see it most is parties going to mediation and the mediators actually telling parents, oh, no, you should be doing equal time because that's what the law says, and it's actually not true. So we did get a huge amount of cases where people entered into equal time arrangements where they were incorrectly advised that was appropriate or the norm, or where they were kind of pressured to do that. The changes to the law, that presumption is now being taken away, because what we've realised is it's actually not in the children's best interest to have that presumption for people to make joint decisions, because a lot of separated parents cannot agree on the colour of the sky, let alone what school their kids should go to. And what we want for kids is that if they need to see a psychologist, that they go and see a psychologist. We don't want to have parents fighting for 6 months about who the psychologist is going to be or who gets to go to the appointment. Like, the kid just needs to go to the psychologist. So I think the changes to the law reflect a lot of, issues that have come to light over the last couple of years about what's best for children. And so there'll be a shift away from that. There'll still be orders made for parents to have joint decision making where that's appropriate, but you won't have that presumption that it should apply.
Right, okay. That is, I have to say, that's amazing, because I have so many patients where, one parent won't agree, or they don't believe that the child has, neurodiversity, or they don't want the child to go and see a pediatrician or whatever. And it's actually an absolute nightmare, because then these children end up actually not having treatment for conditions that they probably should have treatment for. So I actually think that's going to be really amazing for doctors. Actually, it's going to make, and psychologists, going to probably make our lives a lot easier.
Yeah, I mean, I think there'll still be ongoing issues. I don't think it'll be a quick fix, and it might still be difficult to get an order for sole parental responsibility, but I think it might be easier than it has been, because there's definitely an approach, through a lot of courts and with a lot of judges to say, yes, we'll start with that equal shared parental responsibility, even where, and it's so often ordered in cases where there's just such high conflict and such issues with communication. It's just setting these parents up to fail. Yeah. If you have that order that it actually requires them to make a joint decision, but what if you can't? Then you end up back in court, and that's not good for anybody. So I actually think that where possible, absolutely parents should communicate with one another and make a joint decision if they can. But if they can't, then there should be an avenue for what's to happen in those circumstances, rather than the kids having to wait months and months and months to get treatment or to access services that they need.
Yeah. I have another scenario that comes up quite often, because I definitely do have a lot of patients who, their children are teenagers, and they split their time between two parents' houses. And whenever it comes to HSE, or, working for exams when you're 17 and 18, like moving house every 3 days and packing up all your stuff and all your study materials, and to move to the different house for 3 days or a week is really, really stressful. And one of the things, and it really is only a personal, I suppose, opinion, but my experience is that whenever kids are getting to that 16, 17, 18, if you have been sharing, maybe it is time to ask that child, do they want to have a base? Because as you said earlier, HSE, which are the final exams in Australia at school, like there's tons of pressure. And imagine adding into that every 3 days you have to pack up all your stuff, remember to bring all your notes and textbooks. I mean, it's really, really stressful. And over the last 10 years, I've seen a lot of kids who are kind of 16 to 18, and they're literally about to have a breakdown because they are so stressed out, trying to keep everybody happy, trying to study, and they just feel like they're just absolutely at the mercy of, this system that has dictated that they move house every 3 days or every week. And it must be really, really hard. That'd be the one message I would love to say, is just, I'd love people to just take a step back and think, would you want to do that if you're in the middle of a really stressful period of your life? Like, it would be so hard, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and absolutely. And it just comes back to thinking about it from the kid's perspective. And a lot of people will come in and say, I'm doing this for the kids, but without necessarily going that one step further and thinking, what is actually best for them? Like, what do they actually want, without putting pressure on them? Is it good for them to change that frequently? Is it good to have that many changeovers? And I mean, with what you just said about the age of children, the reality is once kids get to, 15, try telling a 15-year-old what to do. Some of them do feel that pressure and will go along with what parents say. And in those circumstances, parents, I would implore them to just have that insight and to try to work with what's best for the kids, even if that means that they're not going to see them as much. It means being selfless and having to do what's actually best for your child rather than what you want, which is hard. It's hard because you want to spend time with them, but sometimes it's better for them not to do that. But
let's face it, teenagers don't really want to spend time with their parents.
No,
anyway.
They don't. But I mean, this is the reality. The orders are meant to be in place until kids are 18. But once you get, to high school, it becomes much harder then to try and enforce an agreement against a child's wishes. And what we see often is kids voting with their feet and refusing to go to a particular parent. What I find is really hard is this tricky area between about 12 and 15, where a child might be saying, I don't want to come and see you. And that might be valid, and it might be because they've formed their own mature judgment, but it is also often because they're being harassed by the other parent, and the other parent's trying to alienate them from the other parent. So that's, I think, probably the hardest, one of the hardest ages is trying to make sure that kids of that age group, because they're still young enough to be covered by a court order, but they're old enough to have a view and have that expressed, and making sure that when they are expressing that view, that it's coming from a legitimate place, rather than them being just under extreme pressure from the other parent. So it is really hard. It's really hard because we want to try and work out what's best for kids.
Yeah.
But we've got to navigate through so much to try to figure out what that is.
On the other end of the scale, I've had a few patients recently who've had a relationship breakdown very soon after having a baby, so 1 to 3 month old baby, and they've been quite concerned, the baby being a breastfeeding mum, and they're quite concerned because the other partner obviously wants to see the baby as well, but there's like a real stress around, attachment and breastfeeding and all that kind of stuff. Are there rules around that, or what do you do in that situation?
I mean, there's not rules per se, but there's a lot of case law that we would use and a lot of social science research. And I mean, new babies and separations where there's a new baby, they're so hard because your emotions, your hormones are wild. I've done it. Sonny was 8 weeks old, I think, when we split. And so I've lived and breathed that. And your hormones are going wild and you're learning how to care for this tiny little human. You have no idea what you're doing. You're not sleeping. You already feel like your emotions are on a roller coaster. So adding a separation and then trying to navigate that process, there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of worry anyway. So what I try to say to people is, if you can, just try not to make that time too stressful. And for the dads or the other parent, because it's not always dads, but the breastfeeding parent, just try to be a little bit patient because you will get time. What we know is really important with young children and babies is it's seeing the other person frequently, but it doesn't have to be for long. It's really just so that they see the other person's face and they hear their voice and they smell their smell and they go, oh, that's another person that's really special for me. But what we do know with the social science research is that it's vital that we not disrupt that primary attachment with the primary attachment person. So especially if you have a breastfeeding mother, don't disrupt that, too much. Absolutely have to establish a relationship with the other person, but it's not going to be appropriate to start having overnight time straight away if you've got a baby. So it's about tailoring the arrangements around what's best for that baby and not stressing the baby by taking it away from its mum in the early days. Now, that won't necessarily always be the case. I've had cases where from day dot, the non-birthing parent, because it's not always a dad, has been significantly involved from day dot, and there's no breastfeeding, and they've both been bottle feeding, and they've both gotten up during the night, and they've both changed nappies, and they've both administered medication and soothed a baby during the night. So it's not a one size fits all. We have to look at the individual facts of the case and what is the nature of that baby's relationship with each of you. If it is the case that that baby has a primary attachment to one person, and often it is mum, and it's, a breastfeeding mum or even a bottle feeding mum that's given birth, the baby's going to be primarily attached to that person. And what I try to say to dad or the non-birthing parent is, that's okay. Your time will come. Yeah. Like, you are a really special person to this baby's life. But right now, what's important is that this baby feels safe and secure to grow that attachment with that person. And usually that will be mum.
Yeah.
At the start. It's a very important time for that. And what we know is that if children are able to develop that attachment, they then can go on to build secure attachments and relationships with other people in their lives, including dad or the non-birthing parent or mum or whoever it is. So your time will come. And I try to say, don't put too much pressure on mum in that situation because she's already under a lot of stress, having just, delivered a baby and going through labour and going through all of the stuff that goes with that. Add on the separation, the stresses are high, that baby is going to be affected by that stress. What we want to try to create is a safe space for mum and for baby, but whilst also having frequent but shorter periods of time with that non-birthing parent that's gradually built up over time to then building to really significant periods of time and overnight. But it takes a lot of patience, and I have a lot of, empathy and sympathy for dads and the non-birthing parent in that situation, because it's really hard to be separated from your baby. It's really, really hard, and I understand that longing and wish to be with the baby, but it's not always about you. It has to be what's best for the baby in that situation, and it's often shorter bursts of time.
Okay. And so if we can step back and let's think about that couple who managed to navigate things, and they hopefully work with a mediator, and it's all going along sort of as well as possible, and no one's dragging their feet and no one's hiding anything. What's the kind of time frame, the quickest that people could get to a settlement where they're kind of able to draw a line and hopefully move on with their lives positively?
I've had a couple over the last few months. So, for example, I've seen clients in October and their matter's done.
Wow. Okay, that's amazing.
So they come in and they're like, we've separated, we've agreed on the value of the asset pool, we've agreed on this split. Is that fair? And we kind of talk through. There might be a few bits of disclosure that we need to ask for. We draw up the consent orders and it's done. So it's actually quite common for people that have reached an agreement that know all of the details. It can be really quick.
Right, okay.
To get it done. I'd usually say give yourself at least 3 to 6 months going in.
Yeah.
Sometimes a lot longer, sometimes a lot faster, but generally around that 3 to 6 month mark.
Okay.
It would be a fair estimate of time.
And obviously lots of people will come out of that situation and ultimately go into a new relationship. And, they've maybe had their fingers burned and had large lawyer fees and had lots of conflict. And they maybe are thinking, okay, I'm now in a new relationship. What do I not need to do now so I don't end up in the same position again? So would you have any advice for people who are, maybe having a blended family, what they should be doing to protect assets for children and keep everything fair? Like, do you have any advice in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, I work with a lot of clients in that exact scenario, and once burned, people are very keen not to let that happen again, and so I often will help people with a financial agreement, it's like a prenup.
Yes.
So you can enter into an agreement with your new partner to say, if we do break up, this is how our property is going to be divided. And then again, holistically working with, say, for example, an estate planning lawyer. So you get people to do their wills and they do their power of attorney and enduring guardian documents. So they're dealing with, their wishes in the event that they lose capacity, if there's a medical issue, or if they die, the estate planning side of things. And we'll also deal with what happens if you separate, just so there's clarity for people moving forward. Obviously, you both have to agree. Yeah, that though. So it's not always appropriate, and it can be tricky if there's going to be future children and things like that, but it's definitely possible to protect yourself, particularly if you've got significant wealth or assets that you want to protect in the new relationship. And sometimes when people get the financial agreement, it's literally like an insurance policy. You can just slip it in the top drawer and then forget about it. But it's also at times a really hard conversation to have. And if you're in the midst of a new relationship and you're all loved up, it's really hard to say, hey, darling, can we just talk about a prenup, so you don't steal all my money? It's not a nice conversation to have, but I think it's a really important one. And people in their second marriages or second serious relationships, I think they're much more willing to have those conversations, having already been through the process.
And do you ever see people I'm sure you do, see people who are in a second marriage breakdown and they've made horrible mistakes financially again, or you're like, no, why didn't you do X, Y, or Z?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have had some repeat, clients, that are on their, second or even third, separation. And we're all human, and I think what happens is people want to believe in, their love story, and they want to believe in the goodness of the other person, and they wouldn't do that to me, and they make decisions based on that. And then it doesn't always work that way. So sometimes it can be because they might have made silly or naive decisions, but most of the time it's just them thinking, oh no, this is going to work out this time, which is a beautiful thing. It just sometimes backfires in a family law context if you try to be too good-natured. Yeah. And it's hard because I try to be optimistic. I think I'm fairly optimistic, but my job makes me cynical because I see the worst in people, and I see things go badly. So
in an ideal world, do you think everyone should have some kind of prenuptial agreement from the outset in their first major relationship?
It's hard because it doesn't always fit. and it can be a hard conversation to have. And those documents in and of themselves can be quite tricky. They can be expensive, and there's a real risk that they could get set aside. So for example, if you're a young couple that don't yet have children and you're embarking on your first big relationship and you want to get married and you want to buy a house and you're embarking on this new journey, a financial agreement in that context is not always going to be appropriate, because just think about it. It's got to try to plan for every future contingency that could happen. That could be children. What if those children have special needs? What if they have a medical, a physical, a psychological disability that needs significant attention? What if they think that one person's going to be the primary carer and that's then reversed? What if somebody has a health issue? What if they have an accident and they can't work? What if, one person wins the lottery or gets a big inheritance or they lose their job? Is that agreement going to be fair? And so I don't like doing them for younger couples, especially if I think they're going to have children, because how the hell do you know? Like, having kids is a wild ride and you're in for so many surprises. You just literally have no idea what you're in for, what that child's going to be like, what their needs are going to be, how that might change the dynamic of your family, and whether what you agree to at that point in time is going to be fair. So it's hard.
Yeah.
Sometimes it will be a good idea. It's usually a really good idea in your second relationship.
Yeah.
And for people that know that they're not going to have any more kids, I would absolutely say 100% give some thought to doing that if you're certain that you're not going to have any more kids. But for people that are going to have kids, sometimes it's not fair.
Yeah.
And you might be locking yourself into something that might not be fair for you down the track, and you might not be able to get out of it.
Okay. I know you're the same as me and an absolute animal lover, and I have had some patients who really struggled with custody of pets in a separation.
I have to laugh because that was the sticking point with me. Like, that's where my settlement negotiations fell over, was over the dogs.
I genuinely, or if I did know that, I'd forgotten. But actually,
I remember the barrister saying to me, "Kate, don't be this person. Don't be this person." I'm like, they're my babies. Like, just, what I'm like. I love them, more than most people. I'm obsessed with.
Yeah. So I have a lot of patients who have maybe got 2 dogs together or 2 cats together, and then one partner is sort of saying, well, I'm taking one of them or I'm taking them both. Is there any kind of legal sort of case law around that, or is it just like you literally have to come to some kind of fair negotiation?
So, I mean, fundamentally, you look at the starting point is whose name the dogs are registered in.
Right.
They are the legal owner of the dog.
Okay.
So dogs are treated as property in family law, which is hard when you think of them as being your babies. You kind of imagine that they'd be treated like kids, and you want to kind of negotiate, your custody arrangement with the pets, which a lot of people do. People come up with like pet plans, like a parenting plan. And they're like, you have the dog on this day and I'll have the dog on the other day. But it's realistically their property.
Right.
And so you deal with them in a legal context in that way. So we'll often deal with, transferring the registration of a dog. So often have issues about people taking dogs. And if the dog is registered in their name, they're not doing anything illegal by taking that dog that's in their name because it's legally their dog. But it's very common to have negotiations about pets in a separation, and to try to negotiate who's going to have that pet and what's appropriate. And some people, come up with an agreement about who has them on what days, and, taking them in holidays and things like that. So, I mean, I am a dog lover. So
no, me too.
Yeah. Some people are like, oh, you're going to think I'm crazy, but the dog's really important. I'm like, you've come to the right place. I absolutely love dogs, but it's tricky because people are so emotionally attached to their animals. It can be a real sticking point.
Yeah. And I also had another patient recently who was definitely the victim of family violence and coercive control. But she was being advised by other family members that she must not leave the family home, that if she sort of gave up and moved out, even though that was probably the safer thing to do, she was being advised by some older family members that no, you must stay, because if you give up the house, you're giving up, you're walking away from your home. And and she definitely was really stressed out, and I wasn't entirely sure what the law was around that. Was she giving something up by walking away? I mean,
no. And it's really common, and we get so many people, thinking that. And look, in some circumstances, it is a good idea to stay in the house for some people, but never if there are safety issues. So that is my very first, conversation with people is it safe for you to be in the house? What's happening? It's not just the physical violence, it's the expanded definition we now have of family violence extends to coercive and controlling behaviour, financial abuse, isolating from friends and family, threatening and intimidating behaviour, damage to property, threats to harm pets. All of it's a very wide definition. If it's not safe for you or the kids to be in the home, then absolutely you should leave, and you're not giving up rights. Your rights are preserved. Sometimes from a strategic perspective, it can be a good move to stay in the house, but never, ever if there are safety issues.
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing that comes up a lot of patients bring me in their phone, and they show me lots of really quite abusive text messages from their ex-partner, and, just to be honest, probably being quite nasty or questioning their parenting, or, just being very personally insulting. Does the court sort of consider that kind of behavior? Or, if someone's in a court process and they're receiving these endless sort of threatening, nasty messages, are those something that are taken into consideration, or should people be keeping them, or should they be just deleting them, or what should they be doing?
Definitely don't delete anything.
Yeah.
If you do end up in court, and I mean, in order for those kind of things to be taken into account, you have to get to a hearing for a judge to be looking at those. So it's either an interim or realistically a final hearing for those things to be taken. So it's quite a fair way into the process. But absolutely, I've seen, cross-examination of people in the witness box where they're shown these text messages where they've given evidence to say, oh, I would never talk badly about her. Like, I've never been abusive. And then it's like, well, can I just show you these text messages? And it's, you effing bitch, and, all these awful things. And you just, that's how they come undone. And I think if you can establish a pattern of, for example, controlling and coercive behaviour, the court's really shifting how that's being taken into account. It's now a crime. So some police are taking those kind of behaviours much more seriously. So absolutely. And what I would say to people is be very careful about what you put in writing or what you put on social media. We use Instagram, we use Snapchat, we use TikTok, we use Facebook, whatever evidence there is available. And people are so silly with some of the things they put, bagging the other parent out on Facebook or on another social media platform. We just take screenshots of that and put it straight into an affidavit. So just be smart. But absolutely, if you have those messages, don't delete them, because you will probably need them down the track.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, I can't think of any other questions that I have for you. Is there anything else that you think that we haven't talked about, or anything you would love people to know?
I don't think so. It's hard. I mean, I could talk about family law for
I just
hours and
remembered
hours.
one thing. I'm putting my hand up to ask another question. Also, often have people who come to see me and they feel they can't afford to go to see a lawyer. Where do they start to try and see if they're eligible for legal aid? Or can you give any advice on that?
So if you go to Legal Aid's website, you can apply, do an application where they'll assess whether you're eligible. So you can put in your details on their website and it will tell you whether you're likely to meet the criteria. So they do a merit and a means test. So you can do the assessment through their website. They often do clinics as well, so you can pop in and get some advice for clinics. Places like Law Access is a really good place to start. So that's a phone service where you can call to get some just preliminary, it's not necessarily advice, but information to direct you in the right place. Okay. Some firms will do free initial consultations or give some preliminary free advice. So our firm offer, we call them discovery calls. So it's like a 15-minute phone call with a lawyer just to get an idea of where you're at and whether we should refer to somewhere like Legal Aid, or whether it might be referred to a different lawyer, or whether it's something we could take on in a limited capacity. It's really hard for people that fall in that gap between being eligible for legal aid and being able to afford legal fees. It's really hard, and I think that's probably an area that needs some work, because a lot of people can't afford it. But I think if you are able to afford just to get some preliminary advice, I think it's vital that you do that to get advice about what your entitlements are and tips and traps of what to look out for, so that even if you do it yourself, you're doing that with an understanding of what your rights, what your entitlements might look like, or just limited funding of certain parts of it. But there's services like community legal centres, women's legal services, places that will do, cheaper fees. So there are lots of different options. People do their matters themselves. We have lots of self-represented parties running their own matters, and it's hard because it's a hard area to try to represent yourself, but you can do it. And I've helped quite a few people this year kind of behind the scenes. So I just give them advice. They do all of the court appearances themselves. I help do their documents. So we just do limited assistance, which can be really helpful for people. So there are lots of different options, but I just encourage them to get some advice early on.
Yes, before it all gets
about where to go and what their rights and entitlements look like.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Okay. Well, I'm just going to ask you one last question. I promise it's the last one. So what piece of advice would you give your 20-something self?
Just be nicer to myself. I think I gave myself a really hard time. I can be a perfectionist, and I think that little voice, I like to, work hard and I like to achieve, really good results. But I think in that process, I've been quite hard on myself. So just be a bit nicer, like go easy, ease up. And I think, spend more time with friends, travel, be nicer to yourself, and back myself a little bit more. I think coming into 40 has been incredible because I just finally feel like I've landed in my own skin and feel like I know who I am and what I want and where I want to go. And I sometimes just want to go back to that 20-year-old self and give her a little cuddle, be like, it's all right, you'll get there. But
That'd be good.
Chill out.
Yeah,
be
absolutely.
a bit nicer.
Absolutely. So Kate, you've been amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge. So if anyone listening would like to find you, to come and chat with you in person, where would they find your details? Where would they be able to contact you?
So I'm a partner at Orbell Family Lawyers, which is the most incredible legal team. Shout out to the team. So we have an office in Erina. We also have an office in Mona Vale, and likely going to expand, from there. The team's grown really rapidly over the past 12 months. And I can honestly say, hand on heart, it's the most incredible place I've ever worked. They really look after their people, and the team is just beautiful, beautiful. Fantastic lawyers, but beautiful humans. So if you go to our website, which is www.orbellfamilylawyers.com.au, you can actually book in for a free 15-minute discovery call through the website, or you can book straight in for an initial conference with one of the lawyers online. So everything's really user-friendly through the website. And happy to take any of those calls with anyone that might need some just preliminary advice or information.
So you don't have closed books then?
No. Sometimes we have to. I have had to earlier this year to say, just for this month, I just cannot take any calls. So that does happen. But we've got 5 full-time lawyers.
Okay, amazing.
At the firm. So plenty of people that are able to assist even if I'm too busy. But at the moment, well, we're about to close for 2 weeks, but can definitely assist if people would like to have a call.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
You are so welcome.
When I started this podcast back in December 23, I knew that I was lucky enough to have amazing conversations with various health professionals across all facets of medicine and allied health. And I knew that you would probably really enjoy being a fly on the wall to hear what we talked about. And that's how the podcast was born. And what you probably don't know is that this is a bit of a passion project. We don't have any sponsors or funding. And without your help, we won't be able to continue bringing you these great guests. So if you can please spread the word about the podcast, share it with someone who you think might benefit from the conversation that you've just listened to, or if you can leave us a review or a comment, it would mean the absolute world, because that actually helps the podcast spread further and get more people to hear our message and hopefully allow us to invite bigger and bigger guests onto the show. And I would so appreciate you helping me back. Thank you. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions, or statements within it do not constitute medical, healthcare, or other professional advice. Information is provided for educational and entertainment purposes only. If you have any health concerns, always consult your doctor.